Today's Digital Humanities Colloquium is unlocking the Africa Evangelistic Band sound archive with Good Enough AI by Willemien Froneman. She is a senior researcher at the Center for the Study of the Afterlives of Violence and the Reparative Quest at Stellenbosch University, and the author of The Groovology of White Effect, a book on music, race formation, and effect. She's also the founder of @Listen, a boutique consultancy that translates her research into practice by helping businesses manage their physical workspace atmospheres and optimize their presence in generative AI search results. So that sounds very, very interesting. Willemien, let me stop my share and then you can take over. There we go.
Thanks for the introduction, Manu. Let me just get my PowerPoint going. And then this one. How's that? Can you all see this?
Yeah, that looks good. Did you also share the sound that we tested earlier?
I did. So I'm going to hope this works. And if it doesn't, I'll just adjust a few settings, but I did what we did previously. So
okay, wonderful, thanks.
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity, Manu, and for the invitation, and it's good to be here with you, and thanks for everyone who's joined. So my paper today examines a dimension of the colonial archive that records perspectives on colonial, post-independence and apartheid subjects in Africa during the latter half of the 20th century in quite exquisite detail. This is the sound archive of the Africa Evangelistic Band, or the AEB, founded in Cape Town in 1924 by three Irish sisters, May, Emma and Helena Garrett. The AEB emerged from an evangelical tradition shaped by the sisters' experiences of religious revivals in Donegal in Ireland, initially targeting police officers and the so-called coloured communities of the Cape Peninsula. The AEB's missionary work quickly expanded to all provinces of South Africa and then to several pre-independence African states, including what was then Bechuanaland, Southwest Africa and the Belgian Congo, where the AEB had mission stations for several decades. While its primary goal was religious conversion through addressing social issues like alcoholism, domestic abuse, gambling, and also giving medical advice in Africa especially, the AEB operated within a fundamentally colonial context where revivalist Christianity, race, and cultural identity were constantly negotiated through multilingual interactions. A few years after their arrival in South Africa, the sisters purchased 2 properties in Hout Bay in Cape Town and established a training college named Glenvar after their home near Dublin. Modeled on the faith mission in Edinburgh, their approach involved training so-called pilgrims to spread the gospel within local communities. Always working in pairs, these pilgrims would approach communities, hand out tracts, and relay their personal testimonies to potential converts. The organization also hosted revivalist conferences, which initially took place in makeshift tented camps before the AEB acquired permanent campsites all over the country, where regular meetings are still being held. Over time, the organization developed a sophisticated media apparatus, evolving from weekly printed newsletters to its members into a cassette mission that distributed recorded sermons and religious publications across Southern Africa and further afield. I'll just move on here. I discovered this mission archive quite by accident while retracing the footsteps of my maternal grandmother, who had studied at Glenvar in the 1940s. When I first visited the premises in January 2024, on the campus that was built in Claremont in the 1970s, the AEB was in the process of selling its sprawling property in this well-to-do area of Cape Town and clearing out all of the offices. It was there that I uncovered more than 6,000 cassette tapes containing sermons, religious testimonies, and recorded songs, along with songbooks and an extensive paper archive covering the history of the institution. I'm convinced that had I not encountered this collection when I did, it would likely have been discarded, mirroring the fate of many other such archives in South Africa. In addition to the tapes, the AEB maintained a well-stocked library of religious books, many from small Afrikaans religious presses. Also found approximately 78 recordings of sermons in isiXhosa and Setswana, presumably originating from a different missionary group. There were also children's books, missionary posters, numerous photographic slides and letters documenting the AEB's work in the Belgian Congo, and annotated Bibles, diaries, and other religious texts. The AEB archive thus provides a rich and extensive resource for exploring South Africa's musico-religious history, documenting in particular how local religious activities intersected with transnational religious movements across Europe and Africa during the 20th century. As you will hear, one of the unique aspects of the collection is that it presents a corpus of long-form Afrikaans speech, displaying fascinating regional and cultural variations. These recordings, produced during a period of intense political conflict, capture the ways evangelical religious discourse intersected with the realities of everyday life and dealt with or evaded those political ideas. As you can imagine, a project of this scale can be approached from many different angles. The material is important in a historiographical sense, in that it can tell us many interesting things about South Africa and Africa's colonial and apartheid past. The project also lends itself to artistic research. The archival material presents many opportunities for critical artistic explorations or reimaginings of revivalist aesthetics, incorporating visual media, sound, and even creative nonfiction. But building on some of my earlier projects and my primary training as a sound studies scholar, I'm of course intrigued by the sonic aspects of the archive. And here I'm not thinking exclusively of the music in this archive, which includes hundreds of hymnals and songbooks, as well as some LPs, as well as the recorded songs found on the cassette tapes. Building on my research on affect and race formation in Boere music and some of Stephanus Miller's and mine's joint research into the early phonology of Afrikaans, I'm particularly interested in studying prosody and affect in these lengthy sections of recorded speech. Those patterns of emotional behavior that are encoded in bodily, vocal, and speech gestures and are meant to convey paralinguistic meaning. In other words, beyond the music of the AEB and the content of the sermons, I'm interested in the musical aspects of this corpus of recorded speech, the rhythms, intonations, loudness, and timbres that shape expressivity and emotion. The emotionally charged nature of these recordings and their rhetorical flourishes, as you will hear, make them exceptionally well suited to such an analysis, and thus for understanding the prosodic construction of Afrikaans as a spoken language and how that has changed over time. Although the larger project incorporates historiographic and artistic analyses, today, I focus exclusively on the computational methods I'm experimenting with in relation to this speech archive. My turn to computational methods is driven by sheer overwhelm with the extent of this archive, coupled with recent advances in artificial intelligence, which have made it possible for tech-savvy but largely untrained humanities scholars like myself to write and implement relatively sophisticated code in under-resourced environments with minimal infrastructural or research support. My emphasis is therefore on easy-to-use, open source, low resource, and freely accessible technologies. In doing so, I'm following a trend to think about AI interventions as good enough or fit for purpose, rather than striving for perfection or totally error-free results. Now I use this term good enough AI. There's also a nod to David Winnicott's idea of the good enough mother. For Winnicott, the good enough mother creates a holding space for the child's growing independence and autonomy by remaining strategically absent, yet responsive enough to the child's needs. As a metaphor for productive, cooperative human AI listening, this implies that one can think of the role of AI analysis and human listening as a kind of transitional object that draws boundaries, enables interpretation, and creates a holding space for the development of ideas that are beyond the capabilities of the individual listener. So as I'm still at the very start of this project, my purpose today is basically to talk you through some sound examples from the archive, to outline some of the analytical procedures I'm following, and to discuss some practical and ethical problems as they arise. I will therefore try to give you a sense of the kinds of recordings contained in this archive and why they are important, and also show you how I've been applying computational methods and AI to aid the creation of usable metadata and other listening aids. My aim is also to advocate for the digitization of this collection, given that it could potentially infuse research in so many different fields. So I began digitization with one box of cassette tapes recorded in the 1980s. As you can see, the collection is well catalogued, including details such as recording date, preacher speaker names, the recording location, and catalog numbers. It immediately becomes apparent also that the tapes were classified into 3 color-coded categories. Yellow tapes contained religious sermons and testimonies. Blue tapes featured religious song, and green tapes, I surmised after listening, included recordings from the Bethel Training College, an adjunct to Glenvar focused on missionary work among so-called colored communities of Cape Town. From the outset, then, the sound archive mirrored the racial stratification of apartheid. Let's listen to an example of the latter. Hoping this will work.
Eerste Samuel, en terwyl ons Bybels oopblaai, daar kom ons sing net daai koortjie saggies saam. No one can bless my soul today, only the Son of God. No one can bless my soul today. No one can bless my soul today. No one can bless my soul today. Only the Son of God. Only.
I'm just moving on to a second. Could you hear that all right, the music?
Yep, sounded good for me.
Okay. Well, I've got some background noise here myself, which I'm trying to cope with. I'm just going to forward that to the second section to just give you a sense of the emotional intensity of some of these sermons around this point.
Ek kan saam met God se woord oopmaak, Jona die 3de hoofstuk. Jona die 3de hoofstuk en ook Jona die 1ste hoofstuk. Die boek Jona bladsy 848 in die Ou Testament. Groot genade stil en God spreek met jou en met my tot deur 'n woord, 'n baie besliste woord. Die Here het my kom praat deur sy woord. Ek nou eenmaal daar by hoërskool aan my tuisdorp het ek eenmaal besig was om my knie vir God te buig. En sommer daar op powere stille tyd mag ek 'n boekie oop en daar in daai boekie staan geskrywe.
So just from this very brief sort of listening moment, you can hear a definite increase in pitch, for instance, across that section of the sermon, and various other aspects of the voice that coincides with intensity and emotion, which we will get back to a little bit later. On here. So the first step in this good enough AI approach of mine was to start by creating functional transcripts of the audio files, which can be used again to create metadata or for further computational analysis and identifying specific listening cues. And here I utilized the existing, albeit imperfect, capabilities of automatic speech recognition models, also called ASR, alongside the text normalization power of large language models such as ChatGPT. So just perhaps a quick overview of ASR. When I first conducted a search for how ASR was used in museum and archival context in January of this year, there were hardly any resources around. But in the past 6 months or so, archives and museums have seriously started to incorporate AI into its methodologies for creating such metadata. In 2001, I think it was, Emil Sternhoff noted some factors that affected the uptake of ASR in libraries and archives. And he mentioned their technical limitations, infrastructural constraints, legal barriers, and it's kind of disciplinary resistance. ASR also struggles with suboptimal sound quality, background noise, dialectical variations, and overlapping audio layers, issues that are particularly acute in historical media, such as the example I've just played for you. Furthermore, audiovisual archives, unlike mine, which happens to have good metadata, often suffer from sparse and inconsistent metadata, making these materials difficult to search and process. And copyright restrictions further hinder large-scale computational analysis of sound archives, as many audiovisual materials remain inaccessible for digital processing, requiring scholars to conduct research on site. So what makes this archive, I think, unique in this sense is that because it was intended for missionary work and for wide dissemination, there are, of course, no copyright issues involved, which is a major hurdle in trying to analyze these kinds of materials. So let's start. Let me just run you through how I created rudimentary transcripts using ASR system and ChatGPT normalization. What I did was to basically use Whisper, which is produced by OpenAI, and it has different models, from tiny models that are for short snippets to more extensive models. I used the medium model just as a kind of a test. And it has the option to automatically detect the language it is transcribing, or that you can set it. Of course, there are no specific settings for Afrikaans, so I used automatic language detection. And here is what I came up with. So first, let's listen to a snippet of this, and then I'll take you through the steps I took to get there. So just a note here that this clip that I'm going to play right now exemplifies a central ethical concern in working with this material. The problem that much of this material contains biased and often racist reflections on religious matters. So this one comes with a trigger warning, and I'll also talk a bit about counter metadata approaches to address bias and racism inherent in historical recordings. But let's first listen. Starting around here.
Geslag nog aan die gang is. Hulle moes ingegaan het. Maar vriende, die hele situasie het in die dag waarin ons lewe amper verander. Want die sendingvelde het gekom tot aan die drempel van die lande wat sendelinge uitstuur. Dit het gekom tot aan die drempel, liewe vriende, tot binne in die huise van die mense wat ons graag wil bearbeid. Dit is nie meer ver weg nie, ons stede, ons dorpe, liewe vriende, in die plekke het die sendingveld van ons dag geword. Dit het gekom tot in die huise langs ons, liewe vriende. Daar het die sendingnood in die sendingveld gekom. Nou natuurlik, as ons aan sendingwerk dink, liewe vriende, dan dink ons dadelik aan sekere tipes van mense, sekere soorte van mense, en ons dink miskien aan die bosse van Afrika en die moerasse van Suid-Amerika ensovoort. Maar vriende, wat is dit wat 'n mens 'n sending voorwerp maak? Is dit sy kultuur? Is dit sy agtergrond? Is dit die kleur van sy vel? Is dit sy opvoeding? Nee, liewe vriende, die voorwerp van sendingwerk is die persoon se geestelike verhouding met God. En of hy 'n man is met 'n geweldige geleerdheid, maar duisternis in sy gemoed, liewe vriende, dan is hy net so 'n sending voorwerp.
So So you can, this is the automatic English translation, but here are the steps that I went through. So you can see the original whisper transcription is fairly bad. It suffers from a range of defects, which I've summarized here. Dutchisms, so you can see words with the that are spelled in the Dutch fashion, Zuid-Amerika. The plurals are in Dutch format. So it's not an Afrikaans text as you see the original whisper transcription here, but normalized with a large language model, which just means that I prompted it to return this original transcript in a format that sort of Afrikaansified it, sticking basically just to orthographic things and not to interpretation. You also have to do some limitations there in the settings. I could easily get a normalized transcription that retained the meaning, but fixed issues like punctuation, spelling, and words that doesn't exist in Afrikaans. And on the right-hand side, you can see the automated English translation of that same snippet. So the most obvious mistake it made was in this phrase in the second paragraph, where it said, die agtergrond is die sleur van die veld. And it translated it, or it normalized it in the large language model, is die sleur van die veld. And then that mistake got driven into the next part, where let me just move my window around, where it said, is it the monotony of the field? But if you listen to the original one, there was a slight hesitation in the voice. So the speaker said, is it the kleur van die vel? But he had a sort of hesitation, or he misspoke it, so it sounded like an S instead of a K. So that's quite a significant mistake, to get the color of the skin turning into the monotony of the field. So this is not an exact science, and you need to still go back to this. But all in all, it gives you a pretty good sense of what this sermon is about, what the problems are with it, what you can do with it, and what next steps you can take in analyzing it. So I went through this series of mistakes. Let me just move that up again. And then, of course, once I got that first whisper transcription, it necessitated quite an extensive post-processing issue with the GPT, not GTP, and there's also one of the big problems there was that the AI tended to overcorrect my transcripts. So it would paraphrase too much, or change the meanings of words, or even at times complete the transcript where it thought it wasn't done yet. And of course, you don't want those things, but the solution is simply to not work within ChatGPT, but to write very easy Python scripts to enforce those rules. But the hallucinations, of course, will be a problem as long as they are in the models themselves. But what I could then come up with is basically a generative engine archival metadata card for this specific recording, because it could read both the sleeve of the audio recording, the actual tape cassette. So I got that primary metadata from the cassette itself. And then it could give me quite a decent description of content, or a content summary. So if we just read that together, this recording captures a complete sermon by Mr. D.R. Meyber based on Romans 1, focusing on Christian mission and personal commitment. The preacher discusses Paul's calling to spread the gospel, encourages believers to cultivate a comparable vision for service, etc., etc. So we also have some keywords. And then this is the counter metadata practice I referred to earlier. Because this recording reflects viewpoints and biases characteristic of apartheid racial hierarchies, it's a good practice, I think, to include that in the metadata itself. And the large language model is actually quite capable of creating that kind of surfacing that kind of bias and marking it. And so if one extends this into creating metadata for the entire archive, one could set up content warnings or even create cross-references to alternative voices and perspectives in order to try and mitigate this. And you'll see algorithmic bias in action, not only in terms of the content of this archive, but also what we call algorithmic bias in automatic speech recognition. So let's just listen to one of these Xhosa 78 recordings that I found, and I can just play that for you.
Avulukango isithembiso sikaYesu sithi ndiyakungena kuye ndidle naye athi yena adle nami. Ulindele wena ke ukuba umvulele inhliziyo yakho uthi uvile ilizwi lakhe ukuze angene. Uvula ucango ngoba nguwe onamandla ukuvula olo cango lwenhliziyo.
So despite the advances of AI and the successes I experienced when working with Afrikaans recordings, algorithmic bias immediately became apparent when applying that same approach to this recording. In fact, the process failed at the first hurdle because Whisper does not support Xhosa at all, nor does it recognize it as part of its automatic language detection function. This reveals a fundamental data imbalance as African languages are underrepresented in training data, and none of the proprietary ASR models currently support Xhosa to my knowledge. ASR for Xhosa would therefore require significant resources for fine-tuning and training existing models, which presents both a challenge and opportunity. On the one hand, the lack of existing support means that transcription is currently a labor-intensive process requiring human intervention at multiple stages. However, the 50+ recordings I have found present a unique opportunity. They not only provide insight into historical religious discourse, but also serve as rare speech corpora for training ASR models on historical data. This work thus has the potential to decolonize artificial intelligence and expand accessibility to similar under-documented archives. And just some of the issues specific to ASR and dealing with Xhosa is some of the phonetic complexities of the language. In these recordings, there are also a lot of code switching going on between English and also between different modes of speech production, and also between speech and music, which complicates the transcription accuracy. And then, of course, a lack of training data in the sense that ASR models are primarily trained on European language, and that there is no real commercial incentive for that to change. So the final example I want to play to you is where I tried something else, and that is to not start with the transcription of the language, but to start by analyzing some of the prosodic features of the voice. And for this, I used a toolkit called Open Smile. You can access it at that link. And it basically extracts certain features of the voice and correlates that with emotion and expression. So it can extract numerous kinds of features the most obvious, as you heard in those first few examples, are relative pitch, for instance. So as excitement builds in a sermon or a speech, the voice tends to elevate and become higher. Then also loudness. As a speaker reaches a rhetorical climax, it tends to talk louder. It also tends to talk faster, for instance. And then there are sections that you could also hear in some of those earlier voice recordings where the voice kind of breaks up in the moment where a state of excitement is reached, or sometimes just from pure exhaustion, the voice gets kind of noisy. So you hear not only a sort of a pure voice, but one tainted with sort of growls and sighs and things like that. So this toolkit can extract like thousands of different features. For now, I just focused on loudness and pitch. And just to get you, before we start, let me just play you again a section of this to give you a sense of what this is about. I'll start there.
Het ek hom daar gaan besoek en 'n vinger gewys na hom. Maar hy was ook 'n probleem geweest. Ek het nie so ver gekom nie. Hy was tot in 'n sel geweest wat die magistraat hom laat toesluit het, want hy was 'n gevaar vir die gemeenskap geweest. Nog het ek aangegaan. Ek gaan sien toe die dokter, ek sê vir hom, wel, ek dink ek het 'n probleem. Hy sê, ja, hy weet, hy is net ons buurman geweest. Groot vriend, is nog steeds baie persoonlike vriend van ons. Hy sê vir my, kyk ou broer, daar is geen medisyne wat ek jou kan gee nie. Hy het my goed gegee om my stelsel weer op te bou, dat ek kan sterk word, dat ek nou kan nigter word en oor die goed kom. Maar hy sê, daar is geen medisyne, die mediese wetenskap het geen oplossing, geen medisyne. 10 shillings kos, 80 sent na 'n rand om by die huis te kom. Dan het ek 10 shillings oor. En daardie jare was 'n bottel 98 sent. En ek dog so, wag 'n bietjie. Maar ek het net vir God beloof. Sy my hier uithelp, dan gaan word ek predikant. Ek sê vir die taxi, ek sê, kyk, vat my nou 19 Brebner weg toe, maar net so by die Star Bottle spoor verby. Net so een straatjie wat jy net moet afdraai. Gaan ek met die drank, kom by die huis, weer van voor af. Ag, ek het probeer, ek het regtig probeer. Uit my hart uit probeer, ek het geroep tot die Here. My huwelik het tot niet gegaan.
So what we have here is a kind of a confessional speech where the speaker talks about his fall into alcoholism and how he's then delivered from that. And so I started this recording not by looking at the transcript, but only looking at some of the sonic markers that we could extract with the Open Smile application. And this is sort of how the pitch and loudness chart can be plotted if we had to visualize it. But initially, I didn't really ask you to visualize anything. I asked ChatGPT to kind of reverse engineer how we dealt with this track together. The outcome being that we could come up to ChatGPT and I together with a kind of annotated transcript of the sermon, which both transcribed the text, but also described the vocal features and tried to correlate these two things. So when I first uploaded the huge Excel file with all the temple acoustic measures there, ChatGPT could identify in this data. And of course, this is only a sort of a first step, and we'll refine that as we go along. It could identify 4 distinct acoustic moods. So this was the first clue, but they were not yet text-based. I then tried to cross-reference this with a transcript. Again, this was a very sort of subjective analytical process. sort of a co-listening with AI rather than trying to come up with scientific results. And what we could then identify is that this soundtrack could be broadly aligned to 4 scenes. First, a childhood narration where this man tells about how he grew up, how his parents were alcoholics, how he promised that he would be different from his father, then how he descends into alcoholism, and that coincided with specific features of the voice and rhetorical measures that he used to kind of portray that chaos. Then a moment of prayer revelation, and then a resolution. I then went back to the recording and re-listened to some of these moments, and this is where it became that kind of holding space where the AI and human listening came together in order to provide a sort of a snapshot of this track that can be useful for further research or just to get a grip on what is going on in there. So the outcome of this kind of analysis is that one can create an annotated transcript with scenes that describe both the content of that particular area in the sound file and its sonic features. So I'm just going to show you one of those scenes and the kind of information that I could gather from that. So this deals with this section around between 15 and 20 minutes. So I'll just play you a short extract there. No.
90 sent. En hy slaan my, maar ek voel dit nie eens nie, ek is so besete. Maar gelukkig dat dit veroorsaak dat ek nou omdraai en my vrou los en toe agter hom aangaan. En hulle moes almal vlug en toe ek terugkom is my vrou weer die kinders bygekom, die kinders gevat en sy is toe weg. En ek is net so alleen in daai huis. Ek het nie eens gaan werk nie, ek het verkoop wat ek kon. Hulle het hulle klere gevat, hulle het die polisie gekry om hulle toe kom saam met hulle te kom, hulle is gevlug vir hulle is te bang vir hulle lewe. Hulle het toe alles gevat, ek het nogal seker gemaak dat hulle alles vat. Ek het hulle nog vinniger gejaag as wat hulle nog kon wegkom daarso. En daar het ek gebly vir omtrent 'n week. En net gedrink. Ek het 'n kan wyn gehad, 'n paar bottels wyn en dan dadelik gelê voor die radiogram en plate gespeel en daar het ek wakker geword en ek die wyn gevat, dan het ek weer in die slaap geraak en dan het ek wakker geword. Ek weet nie hoeveel dae verby gegaan nie. Totdat ek begin stemme hoor in die huis. Hoor iemand roep my naam. Ek dog my vrou teruggekom. Stap weer, nee, die huis is leeg. Daar lê my bed. Ek het nie eens lakens opgehad nie. Sy het alles gevat. En ek hoor net gaan sit weer in die kombuis en sien ek daar kom 'n slang by die muur uit. En ek kyk die besigheid en ek spring toe van die tafel op. Nou kyk ek na die ding, maar toe sy weg.
So if I then asked ChatGPT to write an analytical commentary on this specific section based on the Excel sheet, and so based on the actual data points that were extracted by OpenSmile. And of course, one will have to cross-check this, but as a first step and as a means of just getting a grip on this very large archive, I think this is quite insightful. So it, for instance, it says, the voice here is no longer narratively ordered, but affectively erratic, a prosodic signature of embodied chaos. Rapid alternations between confession and relapse produce an oscillating intensity pattern, mirroring the cycles of intoxication and remorse described in the content. In phenomenological terms, the voice performs its own undoing. Breath fragments, vowels are clipped and timing between phrases contracts. The affective field shifts from retrospective narration to embodied reenactment. The sonic surface becomes porous, registering violence not only as content, but as acoustic residue. This phase exemplifies the sonic symptom of affective overflow, where trauma ceases to be narrated and instead become audibly enacted. So the AEB archive invites us to reconsider the missionary encounter not only as a textual or theological event, but also as an acoustic one, a history written through recorded speech. In engaging with this vast corpus, my aim in sharing some of these experiments has been less to perfect transcription than to wonder what listening might mean in a computational age. The good enough AI approach I've proposed acknowledges both the exciting advances in speech recognition tools and their limitations, that speech recognition, even when partial or error-ridden, can still open new pathways for understanding the emotional and social textures of the past. The hybrid workflow I've described foregrounds human discernment in dialogue with machine processing, allowing AI to extend rather than replace the researcher's listening capacity. This approach turns the tension between automation and interpretation into a productive site of inquiry, one that mirrors the layered mediations, linguistic, technological, ideological, embedded in the archive itself. At the same time, the project exposes the profound inequities that structure the digital present. The absence of isiXhosa and Setswana from mainstream ASR systems reiterates the colonial hierarchies that once governed whose voices were preserved and whose were silenced. Addressing these exclusions by building or fine-tuning models for underrepresented languages becomes both a technical and an ethical task. In this sense, good enough AI is not merely a pragmatic compromise. It is an ethical orientation that seeks to listen otherwise and to extend computational attention towards the margins of the archive, where so much of Africa's sonic history still resides unheard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willemien. This was a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have a whole list of questions about all kinds of things, but I see there is also something in the chat. There are a few comments on the sound quality, still very good. And then a few kind of comments on things that are not so good in the sound quality. I was actually wondering about that as well. So some are very good, some are really bad. Okay, so Tanya has a question as well. So did you try using Whisper on the Xhosa data at all? I'm just wondering if that would work and give similar results to the Afrikaans.
Yeah, no, not at all. It didn't work nearly as well. And I think that was because of this intermediary step that basically first leaned on Dutch ASR before I turned it into Afrikaans. So I could sort of get the general gist of what the sermon was about. It was basically a reading from the Bible, so not very interpretive, but not to the same extent of detail at all. So, of course, these things change very rapidly. I did that, I think, in January or February this year was the last time I actually ran the ASR on the Xhosa data. But so I'd be interested to know if there are, in the meantime, if better models have been released, or if other people are working in this field.
You know, I don't know personally. I'm not sure what other people, if other people know about that. I do see Masi has a question, very interesting, makes me think about the African churches that do interpretation in the services, mostly to languages of the locals. Yeah, I think that might be very interesting. I'm not sure if these are recorded, Masi.
I don't think they are recorded, Prof, but it would really be interesting to, you know, in addition to what we just learned now, to see how that actually would, you know, be studied, because it's something that has been happening for the longest time. It's just that many of them are not, I don't think many of them are recorded. So obviously it would be hard to kind of get that data that exists, unless if someone interested would actually now ask for permission. But I know that many of the churches actually do that.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting field just to think about emotional expression in religious speech. And you could hear how musical that actually is, and how distinct those changes in pitch, for instance, and the loudness and the softness, and how all of those mechanisms is, and it would be interesting now to look across a whole range of these sound recordings and see where they are similar, where they are dissimilar, and if there are some commonalities in how words are pronounced and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And also, now that we're speaking of the intonation as well, and the high pitch and the low pitch, you actually get to experience that when, let's say the pastor is now in a very spiritual, in the spiritual realm now, he's just high and about, like the recordings that we just played now. There are certain elements as well that we can actually pick up from that.
Interesting.
And also, I think even looking at languages as well. Say, for example, I know that if as a second or third language speaker of English, there would be a difference between how I would go into a service and serve in English compared to me doing it in my own language as well. There would be differences and varieties as well.
Yeah, definitely. And this whole area of tonal languages and how that works with automatic speech recognition, because of course some languages, the tonal aspects of the language changes the meaning, and all of those things are quite hard to map onto an automatic speech recognition system.
We see Tanya also had a comment on the intonation very much, still like today.
Do you mean in churches, Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, just so mainly when people, for instance, read from the Bible. So at school, usually, you know, when they have school openings in the Monday mornings or something, mostly people are going to read from the scripture, like something that they found, and there the intonation is very similar still to what I heard here. So that was actually amazing to me, because I mean, these recordings are quite old, right? And I'm not a native speaker of Afrikaans either, but I could actually perfectly follow what they were saying. I would have expected, like with Old Dutch, for instance, I would have more trouble, or like old recordings of German are more difficult for me to follow as well. But this Afrikaans was like very clear, and yeah, I mean, it sounded almost like it could have been spoken today. And the intonation really reminded me of how people still do this today. So that was kind of interesting to see that. Yeah.
Thanks, Tanya.
I think William has a hand up.
Hi, Willemien. Really lovely to see you, and really fantastic work. This is really, really cool. And I'm thinking about implications here for kind of music and stuff like that. And I think what's really the kind of coolest part of your paper for me is a shift from the sort of text-based, transcription-based kind of analysis to the sentiment analysis towards the end, right? Where you kind of go towards this idea of looking for emotional kind of signifiers of emotional content and affect in the speech, which I think is fantastic. And why I think it's particularly fantastic is because I presume what's happening under the hood here is a movement from a type of text-based interface to a more embeddings kind of encoding of the audio data, which I think is really key here. So, and I'm sort of, the thing that I'm thinking about here is that actually perhaps the ASR kind of imperative of having a textual transcription is perhaps the thing that's causing quite a lot of problems in your kind of analytical workflow here, and whether kind of shifting to feature extraction for kind of embeddings and stuff like that won't be a better idea, partly because it can then start creating kind of clusters of unannotated data that you can perhaps start pairing in a longer term with textual transcription to actually be able to train ASR backwards in a kind of reverse motion to sort of start kind of doing the transcription better. But basically what my point boils down to is that I think transcription here is the big problem. And I don't think we need to kind of get stuck on that problem, because I think there are alternative representations of the wave format or the audio file or whatever that actually can be really useful for metadata creation, but that doesn't need to be translated into a textual format. And so I'm going to share a link in the chat here to a model that I think could help, which is kind of based on retrieval augmented generation, but kind of bypassing the ASR kind of moment and sort of going directly to an embedding style architecture that would work really well for your kind of sentiment analysis, the kind of emotional, affective kind of analysis. And I think from there you can kind of start really exploring like broader clusterings within the whole archive, and also really importantly lower the resource cost of pushing all this audio file, which is going to be huge at the end of the day. If you have the whole archive, it's going to be kind of, yeah, I can just imagine that the resource cost is going to be incredibly huge. So if you can change that into a format that doesn't require the language to text kind of step, I think that would be kind of imperative in the longer project. But I'll share the little link in the chat. But yeah, I just thought I'd say like really clever move to go to the more embedding style kind of representation of a text here.
Yeah. I think though, what interests me is the interface between the two. So it would be, I don't know if the model that you're describing can also sort of thematically pick up what the, can it create content metadata, or is it just then sonic identifiers?
I mean, I guess it's dependent on the kind of class categories that you're using to sort the data, but yeah, you can have quite a high level sorting system that uses features as its kind of data point rather than just a kind of description. And from there, I guess then the point would be to sort of see, okay, what's actually holding all this data together? We've created these broad classes, but now what's the kind of content that we're dealing with? Yeah. Which might enable a kind of a lower resource workflow in the long run.
Yeah, it might. I guess this is where the humanities scholar in me pops up, and where I'm sort of still intrigued by the specific content of these individual sound files, and not only the sonic features. So I guess what there are also specific affect analysis frameworks that work with both. So you have the ASR aspect, and then to combine it with some of the voice feature extraction nodes. But that is quite complicated. But I think the idea would also be to come up with a specific, I don't know, toolkit for this corpus, So you could because I think that would change, that would be, I don't know how that would translate to others, and how useful it would be to use existing like affect analysis or sentiment analysis, which basically just say positive or negative at this stage, or maybe say anger, or of course the affects here are quite different. They are more like remorse or testimony, or regret or hope, or stuff like that. So I think it is I think the resource issue is a big one, and of course the very first hurdle is to just get all of this stuff digitized. But then I think there are, as you say, so many ways of navigating through such an archive by by using individual persons, tagging a voice to a certain person and then searching that, or then thematically, or then by any of those sonic features that you could extract.
Yeah, no, certainly. Thanks. Yeah, really fantastic stuff.
Okay, thank you. I see we're kind of running a little bit out of time. Interesting. I just have one question that I hope won't be too long. because you kind of skipped over this. I was wondering how you figured all of this out. So how did you do the digitization? Did you actually find a tape recorder or
Yeah.
tape player? How did you decide on certain tools? So for others, if they want to do something like this, where do you start? I don't think I might be wrong here, but I don't think you have a very extensive kind of computational background. So
No.
how did you get all of this together?
Yeah, so I used some of the equipment at the Africa Open Institute. But it's very basic. It's basically a cassette player, and then one of those, I don't even know what you call it, a sort of a transformer box that translates the analog signal into a digital one. So you connect the tape recorder to that thing, and then you connect that box to your Mac. And I used GarageBand to record, to do the basic digitization. I'm pretty pleased with the results. They are quite good, I think. Although I don't know the first thing about this. It's very DIY. My idea in the long run would be to outsource this to a digitization company because it's just too much. And the costs involved aren't actually that much to do so. So people who do this professionally, because that would be just, in terms of time and cost, that would be more effective. And then the other things the wonderful thing about ChatGPT is that you can basically teach yourself anything. So I don't know the first thing about computer programming really, but by asking questions, I can pretty much run Python script. I can also create Python scripts and run them. So I'm basically vibe coding my way through this, if this makes sense.
Okay, no, that definitely makes sense. So my experience with that wasn't always so good, so perhaps I'm just not doing it right. But I think this sounds really good. So I'm looking at my colleagues. So this might be something that you want to try out as well. No, thank you so much. I'm not sure if there are any other quick questions. Otherwise, we are running a little bit over time already. I don't see any additional questions. No, thank you, Willemien. Nice presentation. I think this is really, really nice, really interesting. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Manu, and thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye.